state affiliate to the National Endowment for the Humanities. We, in 2025, are celebrating our 50th anniversary. And we are delighted to partner with Zócalo Public Square on a series of programs funded through the NEH as part of the White House's initiative on anti-hate called United We Stand. We're excited to partner with Zócalo Public Square and UCR Arts to present tonight's program, How Does the Inland Empire Strike Back Against Hate? So I'll now turn it over to Nick Yang from Zócalo Public Square.
All right, thank you, Rick. Hi, everyone, and good evening to everyone joining us online and here in person at UCR Arts in Riverside, California. I'm Nick Yang, and I'm the Digital Communications Coordinator at Zócalo Public Square, a unit of Arizona State University Media Enterprise. At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org on podcast platforms and YouTube. So please subscribe for our latest programs. We were founded in 2003 and are now celebrating our 21st birthday year. We're excited to co-present tonight's program with California Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, United We Stand, UCR Arts, and the UCR College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Our program tonight asks, how does the Inland Empire strike back against hate? To start the program, we are pleased to share a video message from California Attorney General Rob Bonta.
Hey, it's Rob Bonta, California Attorney General, proudly joining you in our shared fight against hate. First and foremost, I'd like to thank California Humanities and Zócalo Public Square for your ongoing commitment to connecting Californians to each other and to promoting understanding of our state's rich diversity. Hate-filled rhetoric dominates our social media feeds, consumes the news cycle, and infiltrates our communities. Hate that morphs into bigotry, discrimination, and violence. Hate isn't new, but fortunately, neither is coming together in solidarity to fight it, just like you all are doing today. Even here in California, the most diverse place in the nation, we are not immune from the dangerous forces of hate. California DOJ released our 2022 hate crime report last summer, and it confirmed what we already knew. Hate is on the rise. Between 2022 and 2023, we witnessed a 20% increase in overall hate crime events. Crimes based on race, religion, and sexual orientation were all up. As California's Chief Law Enforcement Officer, I'm committed to using the full force of my office to address this crisis head-on. That's why we formed the Racial Justice Bureau, to ensure we're looking at every issue through the lens of racial justice. Issued guidance and resources to help the public and law enforcement address hate crimes. Launched CARE, the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, to directly engage with and respond to the needs of communities. And it's why we're conducting a series of hate crime roundtables across the state, including the one held in Riverside, to hear from leaders on the ground in our communities focused on identifying best practices. We'll keep at it as long as hate continues to rear its ugly head in our beautiful communities. That's how we fight back, today and every day. Because hate against any one of us is hate against all of us. And that's not something we can ever stand for. I know that this panel will engender a critical discussion on how we can continue to work together to be resilient against hate. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Bonta. I'll now introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation, Brian Levin. Brian Levin's pioneering research and policy initiatives on hate and extremism law, trends, and composition have been widely sought within academia, the NGO community, courts, and all branches of government. Mr. Levin served as the co-founding director of California State University San Bernardino's award-winning Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism for 24 years. Professor Levin is the 2020 recipient of the annual Wing Family Excellence Award for Outstanding Scholarship for the CSU system. In 2022, he was appointed by Governor Newsom as the Commissioner to the California Commission on the State of Hate, although he is speaking today as a private individual. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you all for coming. Hello and welcome. I'm Brian Levin, Professor Emeritus at Cal State San Bernardino School of Criminal Justice. I don't know why I had to read that. Anyway, I am pleased to introduce our guest. Our first guest is Assemblymember Dr. Corey A. Johnson, a dedicated public servant and a trailblazer in California politics. First elected in November 2022, he proudly serves as the 60th Assembly District's representative and holds the distinction of being Riverside County's first Black state legislator. His commitment to societal improvement extends beyond governance, though. As founder and former CEO of SBX Youth and Family Services, he has been instrumental in combating poverty and violence by focusing on mentoring, education, and community organizing. Dr. Jackson's educational achievements include a bachelor's degree in political science from CSU San Bernardino, a place I know a little about, where he also made significant contributions as a member of the CSU Board of Trustees and as chair of the Santo Manuel Student Union Board of Directors. He furthered his expertise at California Baptist University, earning both a master and a doctorate in social work. We are so honored to have you with us today. Thank you. Candice Mays is the project director of Mapping Black California. Her diverse professional background includes grassroots nonprofit organization management, development, and grant making. And that's hard stuff. She became a tenured literacy teacher with the New York City Department of Education after receiving her master's in English education from New York University. She then pursued an MFA in creative writing, fiction at the University of Miami, where she was a missionary teaching fellow and a summer award winner. Her work and storytelling explores Black migration west and presence in non-inclusive spaces. Humanizing GIS, Candice mines narrative from data on all things historical, Californian, and Black. Can we give her a round of applause? And Nolasco is a senior community engagement and policy advocate at the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, working from their Inland Empire office. He graduated with a BA in psychology from California State University, San Bernardino. We're kind of stacking a little bit tonight. And was one of the co-founders of the Inland Empire Immigrant Youth Collective. Really a person from a very young age dedicated to public service. So thrilled that he's here. He currently sits on the board of the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice. His work is focused on the intersections between the criminal justice system and immigration systems. Since 2012, he has been active in the field and fight to dismantle the collaboration between local law enforcement and immigration authorities, and the fight against mass incarceration in the inland valleys. Luis was a leading force in the effort to eliminate 287G agreements locally and played a key role in organizing the statewide campaign for SB, that's Senate Bill 54, the California Values Act, which means he doesn't have a lot of free time. Anyway, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to remind our audience that we'll be taking questions towards the end of the program. If you're watching online, you can submit questions to the live chat on YouTube. With that, let's get started. Thank you so much. My latest research, which I presented at the White House several weeks ago, showed that in major American cities in 2023, hate crime increased at double-digit levels, and hate crimes have gone up in every presidential election year since federal record keeping began in 1991. So I'm going to start with a question on that. What kind of civil rights and anti-hate methods are seeing the most success here in the Inland Empire, where reporting is oftentimes sparse? Do we have enough action to address the increased hate? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Assemblymember Jackson.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Number one, we are not doing enough in the Inland Empire. I think that we have to remember the history of the Inland Empire. And this rise of hate, only to me, shows me that it's going back to its roots. And we have got to do all that we can to fight against that. Now, what do we do? Number one, something to be proud of is that we need to continue to have people speak up forcefully against it every time that it happens. And then also it's time for us to start building anti-racist institutions so that we can make sure that we institutionalize anti-racist systems, knowledge, training, and advocacy.
Just want to follow that up and with you, and then we'll go to our other panelists. What role does the state have doing this now that we're seeing other states doing away with DEI, doing away with help for immigrants, including at the university levels? Does that make what we do in California more important because it's also a bit of a shining city on a hill for the rest of the country that may not be doing as much, and also with the potential that the federal government may not be after an upcoming election?
Well, the state of California is doing a lot, and it's going to be doing more. One of my goals in the legislature is to continue to build the anti-racist, anti-hate, and anti-xenophobic infrastructure of the state of California. And so a part of that is, we saw the banning of books. Ground zero was the Inland Empire. I authored 1078, and we stopped the banning of books that was signed by the governor to be able to push back against that. We began to see the next boogeyman that the far right was doing, which is trans individuals. And so before we left our session to go on summer break, we passed, and just today, the governor signed the anti-outing legislation that we passed as well. And then also I have a bill this year that is going to expand the authority of California's Civil Rights Department to be able to be more proactive in reaching out to communities and offering assistance to that. And then of course, our anti-hate commission, I think it's a commission
on the State of Hate.
Commission on the State of Hate is doing its work, and we'll be doing a hearing here locally pretty soon as well. So overall, what are we saying in terms of the state of California? Not on our watch. We are making sure that we are upholding what other generations did for us. That when hate, racism, and xenophobia raises its ugly head, we're going to beat it back into the shadows where it belongs.
Well, thank you so much, by the way, for doing this work. And I'll just, as an aside, in my research over the last couple of years, anti-transgender hate crimes were up in 2022, up again in 2023. I want to go to Candice because this is really, really special. My mentor was a federal judge, and he stirred into my cereal how in Brown, social science data, that was the first time that was really used with respect to a civil rights case. So I want to ask you a couple of questions because you're our data person. One is, how do we reach out to the African American community, particularly in the Inland Empire, with our history. Many people don't realize 1912 campaign poster, "Keep Riverside White." When there is skepticism and distrust between law enforcement and even with governmental institutions, what does the research and the numbers show about African American community skepticism and distrust with regard to reporting to law enforcement? And with your knowledge of this, how big of a problem do you think underreporting is locally in the African American community with regard to hate crime and hate incidents, as we know that nationally there's an issue, but because you map statistics out of California, I'd really like to hear about how we can overcome this distrust of law enforcement with respect to reporting hate crimes, and then are there other organizations or institutions that may be able to fill in that gap from your research into all things statistical?
Well, I think the first hurdle to reporting hate crimes is, how do you tell the police on the police? So that's first and foremost, is ensuring that Black citizens in the context of this question, but any citizen or resident rather who experiences a hate crime knows who to talk to and where to go. And that's not always the case. Even in my own work as we're doing the research, I learn about resources for myself. So that's first and foremost. I think secondly, I want to kind of flip that question a little bit, because right now the responsibility is put on the person who has been victimized to report that, when technically it's legally mandated that the sheriff's department and the police department should be doing the reporting. So when you had mentioned just a question ago, the stat about hate crimes increasing since, I think, 1990, you had said, one of the things that I thought about was, are hate crimes increasing, or is the collection of data and recording of hate crimes increasing? And with that, there is still the obstacle of, with it being mandated that law enforcement and other departments who are gatekeepers and I'll just stick to law enforcement for the time being, who are mandated to report these events, are they reporting them, right? We're frequently in our work, we see that while it may be mandated to report every violent interaction with the police, they're not being reported. Or if they are being reported, they're intentionally not ticking off specific boxes. So then you can't identify the race of the person who had this interaction with the police, the sexuality, the gender, so on and so forth. And so there's a couple of obstacles when we're talking about reporting hate crimes and then the accuracy of those hate crimes reported. One is, of course, the mandating of that and passing laws around making sure that we're considering all different types of hate crimes. I feel like when we think about hate crimes, and this just dawned on me while we were sitting here, what comes to my mind is violence, physical or verbal. However, in learning about the history of the Inland Empire, because we're also taught that this is a place that doesn't have a history, in learning about the history of the Inland Empire and hearing the stories of hate that Black residents have experienced, it's not always violent or verbal. It's often what someone didn't do, right? The first Black homecoming queen not getting her picture put in the yearbook, a little boy not being woken up while he was asleep on the bus and waking up in the bus yard. These are also variations of hate crimes that we're not considering. And so I think one is, how are they being classified? Has the requirements for reporting advanced? And then on the other end, who is the person that is holding those who are mandated to report hate crimes accountable for the thoroughness of their reports? Because far too often, my organization is a project of Black Voice News. One of our journalists is here today. Far too often, we'll have requests for data from our executive editor or from our journalists that we can't give them because the data doesn't exist. Because even though it's legally mandated to be reported, it's either not reported or reported incompletely. So it's not as much about like, how do we fix the Black community's opinion of law enforcement? It's about, how does government hold law enforcement accountable so that it's not on us to deal with that?
Thank you so much, and the data bears out what she's saying. Riverside County Sheriff's Department, last couple of years, reported 2, 4 each year. LAPD 2023 preliminary, 841, a record. So I think there might be more than 2 in the 10th largest law enforcement agency in the United States. But thank you so much for bringing that up. Luis, what an honor to have you. I remember somebody telling me you can love the ACLU 100% even if you disagree with them 50% of the time, because they really stand up for these difficult circumstances with regard to a whole bunch of things, freedom of speech, rights. But I want to just narrow in on something, because you and our assembly member were involved with a $7 million, that's a nice chunk of change, $7 million youth accountability team lawsuit. So what I want to know is, how are you continuing the advocacy for policies at the state and local levels to make headway in this area of anti-hate? But if you could specifically talk about this differential with regard to punishment of young people, because I think that would connect into our previous response about why folks don't want to report. So could you tell us, a little bit about that lawsuit, and also if you want to chime in, Assemblymember Jackson, that would be great too. So tell us a little bit about the case, and then what are some of the things at the state and local levels you'd like to continue to make a headway against hate?
Oh boy, so many things that I could talk about, but also I'll preface this, I am not an attorney, so.
We like you better.
Community organizer, so this is my version of the lawsuit, right? And it's challenging the way that the district attorney's office was essentially, discriminating against the way that law enforcement and these schools were punishing black and brown kids, right? We know that, black and brown students are more likely than not to get involved with like willful defiance and these other acts, right? That cause suspensions and all the disruptions, right? It's all because of teachers not being, fully supported in how to deal with these instances, right? And also the reality of that a lot of our black and brown students don't have the supports they need to fully perform 100% when they're at school, right? And so a lot of this program, it was challenging the discriminatory ways in which the youth action teams were sort of functioning here in Riverside County. But in terms of just like what we're sort of working on and what's been kind of happening statewide, I think, I think locally here, one of the big projects is just ensuring that the Inland Empire is welcoming and is not, like anti-immigrant. Again, very similarly, this region has quite a history with the way that we treat immigrants. And I think one of the biggest projects has been ensuring that our localities are implementing policies that are proactive in defending and protecting our immigrant community, which is honestly feels like we're always under attack. Quite frankly, every election cycle, right? We're the one scapegoat community that everybody has been pointing to as the cause for all the reasons. And it's no different here. A lot of the localities, we've seen different cycles. So first with SB 1070, which was the law in Arizona, right? That was seeking to essentially let law enforcement arrest anyone for deportation, right? We saw a lot of support for that here. A lot of city councils going out of their way to, make it known that they support Arizona and they want to have similar laws here. And then we saw it again with SB 54, which I talked a little bit about, the California Values Act, and the way that, we were implementing it here, and a lot of jurisdictions were just coming out, against that. And we're going to see it again now, right? You see the campaign trail, and a lot of the rhetoric right now nationally has really just been focused on xenophobia, and like blaming all of the issues of America on what's happening with the border. And so I think a lot of the work that we've been doing has been ensuring that the policies that a lot of our jurisdictions here are in accordance with the state, and that we're holding them accountable to ensuring that the Inland Empire is a welcoming place. I know it seems hostile at first, but we actually are better than that. And I know the Inland Empire, this is so many immigrant communities here, right, that live and thrive here. And I think we've been able to slowly shift that narrative, but there's so much more work to do. And like I said, there's so many jurisdictions, there's so many small cities here that I think it really does take everybody, and it's a job for all of us, right? You know, I'm one person, and there's a small team of us, right? But there's many of us here, right? And I think the work to, I'm just speaking about xenophobia, right, specifically, but it takes all of us, and education, and convenings, and talking. I think one of the biggest things that seems to me that a lot of people just, the hate comes from lack of knowledge or interfacing with the group, right? So for example, immigrants, and a lot of people have these terrible views of immigrants, and a lot of that couldn't be solved by actually talking to a person that's an immigrant, right? And I think more likely than not, you know, someone knows an immigrant. I think so. A lot of that is like myth busting, and also just having conversations with people, which I think seems very hard nowadays that everything is online. But I think a lot of it is really going back to the root of organizing, right? Which is like going to your community, having these one-to-ones. So, but yeah, I don't want to bore you with all the legislative stuff. So I think that will be some of the, I think the real work here is like really keeping an eye on our county and our cities to ensure that the policies that they're implementing are proactive. And I know some of that, we'll probably get into it later, right? But like racism as a public health crisis is like one of the big ones, right? Like how do we all collectively not let that go? Because I know every jurisdiction out in the IA was saying, yeah, racism is a public health crisis, but what has happened since?
Not every jurisdiction.
Most.
And by the way, you know, another thing that's nice is actually data. All this trashing of immigrants and this replacement doctrine baloney that's out there, guess what? Immigrants have lower crime rates than native-born folks. And if you look at a lot, like for instance, San Diego has a lower crime rate than a lot of other places, but you know what? Facts don't matter on some cable shows. Anyway, I wanted to have you just follow up because we can't ignore the fact that you were a pioneer with that lawsuit and with this reform, which really impacted the lives of so many young people. Can you just give us a coda to what Luis said with that, because you did such wonderful work in that case?
Sure. Well, what we found is that a part of even the work that I was a part of when I founded and led SBX, Youth and Family Services, is that as a part of the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color in California, in one of the convenings, someone from Northern California, ACLU, approached me and said, "Do you know about the youth accountability teams?" And I said, "I know a little bit about it, but you know, I don't know much about it." And learned that these were not really voluntary probation programs providing mentoring, but this was another on-ramp to the school-to-prison pipeline. That for minor offenses that weren't even illegal, by the way, it was just childhood behavior. They were being they were being referred to the district attorney's office, and the parents were receiving letters saying that they've been referred and by not complying could lead to legal action. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like voluntary. And then you had to report to a police department in order to be told about the program. And when we learned that, of course, our first programs were mentoring programs. We were asked, well, are any of your young people a part of this program? We had no clue because we don't ask them about their background. We don't want to stigmatize them. And if we found out that there were actually a number of them that were actually a part of the program and that their parents were concerned that they were part of the program. And so with the guidance and the support of ACLU, we decided to take the risk of engaging in a lawsuit against Riverside County probation, and it turned out that we were right. And we were so right that they didn't want to go to court, they preferred to settle. And the settlement did historic things. Number one, it raised the standard of what young people could actually go into the program. It cleared the records of all young people in Riverside County that were ever associated with the program. And it had monitoring parts of it, and it increased community representation on the Juvenile Justice Steering Committee of Riverside County. The settlement worked so well, and this was like, I don't know, how long ago was this? It was before the pandemic? Oh, who knows? You know, that part is blurry. I don't know. I have no clue. I don't remember anything during the pandemic. It worked so well that since 2017, when the settlement was done, no young person ever qualified to be a part of that program ever again. We completely eliminated that school-to-prison pipeline on-ramp.
If I could just point out two Cal State grads. Anyway, and we'll get back to some of that, but I wanted to have your rejoinder to Luis's statement. With respect to mapping and stats, can you give us some don't worry about getting the exact stats. That's like too much like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire kind of thing, right? Phone a friend and all that. But with respect to mapping and stats, can you give us some example that shows just how we're underperforming for certain communities vis-a-vis others? Like, you know, whether it's criminal justice reform, healthcare, schools. We already covered hate crime a bit, but I think people don't realize how stark things still are. My mentor, Judge Higginbotham, was on the Kerner Commission, and back in '68, they talked about two Americas. So when we actually have an opportunity to have one of the best people in the state on this kind of research, I'd love to hear, you know, I guess it's almost like an endless reel, but some of the areas that you've seen where we're just not reaching our aspirations for equality.
Absolutely. A major challenge. So we have racial obstacles, absolutely. Of course, those intersect with economic issues. Another major challenge that is unique to the Inland Empire is that the region is huge. And it's like bigger than the state of Delaware. There's all these other things you can compare it to, but it's insanely huge. We are big enough to be our own state, our own multiple states in this one region. And so that's one major obstacle, because then the obstacles that are faced in what is considered the metropolitan Inland Empire is going to be very different than the obstacles faced in the more rural parts of the Inland Empire. Side note, when I got this job, I learned that we're technically considered rural, I was like, what? But I guess we do have donkeys. Okay, so anyways, so that's one thing to think about. For example, I'm from Moreno Valley, which is the blackest city in the Inland Empire.
Can we get a shout out from Moreno Valley? All right.
It's great there, don't believe anything.
I remember when Moreno Valley was just a valley.
I was little, but I heard stories about it. I remember when we actually had oranges. So the obstacles that black people are facing in Moreno Valley are going to be very different than the obstacles that black people are facing in Blythe, which is like the outermost Inland Empire community, and they have a significant black population because some settlers moved out there in like the 30s and 40s to like start farming. History you learn when you map. So that's one thing to consider. What I'd also consider, and I wanted to preface with that first and that geographical grounding, because then I didn't want to undermine the next thing I'm going to say when you're talking about like the tale of two cities. Like in the Inland Empire, it's the tale of two counties. The outcomes between Riverside and San Bernardino are drastically different. And I remember growing up like as a kid hearing like murmurings about like Riverside not wanting to be associated with San Bernardino. We like changed our area code, all of those things. But it actually like looked like makes itself apparent in the data. So health outcomes are worse in San Bernardino. Economic outcomes are worse in San Bernardino, or more worse in San Bernardino. And so that's one thing to really talk about, right? And then the resources that both regions have because of those things, or that the outcomes that they have because of the lack of resources is a major issue. And then there are a couple conundrums between ethnic groups, right? So when we're looking at like our two largest minority populations, Black people have higher education attainment levels than the Latino population. However, the Latino people have a significantly higher home ownership rate than Black people.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you just repeat that? They have
So Black residents in the Inland Empire have higher education attainment levels. So completing high school is higher, going off to college, we're doing fairly well in all things considered when it comes to educational achievement. We're doing better than the Latino community. However, when it comes to home ownership rates, the Latino community has significantly higher home ownership rates than Black people do, right? And so there's a conundrum here, because if I have a higher education level of attainment, right, I should have better jobs, and then I should be more likely be able to afford a home, right? This is the logic that like capitalism tells us. That's the last one. I'm going to say the C word today, I promise. But that's the myth, right? That you do these things and this happens. So obviously, right, there's a disconnect somewhere. And we see in the disconnect, or like the contradiction happen when we're looking at jobs and who has job access, the type of quality jobs people are attaining. And as like a newspaper, these kind of conundrums are where stories come out, right? That's really strange that these numbers switch. Where does that happen and why is that happening? And that's when you're really able to dig down and look at other stories and see how people are living in the region. But yeah, so that's an example of where two groups are having very different experiences.
How about healthcare vis-a-vis white folks?
Healthcare is trash, and I'm sorry. It's terrible. It's abysmal. So
I mean, the data is astounding.
Yeah. So health, because of Obamacare, health insurance, like people by and large have health insurance. That's not an issue. What we're seeing is with an influx of people from Los Angeles County, and with that displacement, you're also displacing networks. So then people are coming into the Inland Empire and they don't have access to the same resources that they had in their communities that have been built up over time of the establishment of these communities. And part of why we're seeing some of the social issues we're having here is because the cities and counties are not preparing for the people who are moving in. And data tells you well in advance who's gonna move into your community, so that's just craziness when they seem shocked by where all these people came from. They know, because they helped plan it. And so when people are moving in, what we're seeing is, like I said, largely insured, but then there's a lack of access to resources, there's a lack of access to providers, and so then there's a higher preference for going to urgent care. So I'll use myself for an example. I said when I do this research, I learn a lot about my own circumstances. You see my foot, it's not broke, but it's annoying. And so I sprained it last week. I went to an urgent care to get it looked at. You know what I mean? Like, that's where I go before I go anywhere else when I have to fill out forms and they say, who's your primary provider? I don't have one, because I go to an urgent care because my insurance makes me read through so many things to find one, and then the data space is out of date and all of that. So healthcare access is a major issue in both counties. It's significantly worse in San Bernardino County, which is not surprising given the other economic challenges that they have in the county. There's a relationship between health outcomes and economics, as you can imagine. But in both counties, it's terrible. And because of that, also then the health outcomes of community members, quality of life, life expectancy, all of those things are also very terrible.
You know, I've been going over some data recently, and something struck me. For instance, anti-Latino hate crimes, according to the FBI, hit a record in 2022. My latest research shows up double digits in 2023. Anti-Black hate crime was going down as a proportion of all hate crime from 96 through 2019, and then skyrocketed up. In fact, the worst month for anti-black hate crime, at least up to that point, since records were started in '91, was in June 2020, right after the George Floyd lynching. And we also saw the N-word rise on Twitter. But what I think is so interesting is this associational kind of stuff, particularly with this replacement doctrine and other kinds of bigoted tropes that are now mainstream. So there's actually a question here, but just bear with me. What I've been seeing is hate crime against one group will go up a lot, against another group it'll go up a little, and then the next year they'll kind of switch. But, like for instance, during 2020, we not only saw anti-black hate crime go up, and we not only saw the N-word skyrocket on Twitter, we saw this associational type of hatred. So it was BLM, Antifa, Socialist, DEI. In other words, this kind of associational thing where there's kind of almost a rotation of whatever is convenient. What can we do, both folks who are people of color or religious minorities, but also white folks, to hone allyship? Because we're all in this together. So I'd like to start with you because, gosh, I mean, before you became an elected official, you were so prodigious in putting together coalition work. When I had the honor of meeting Reverend C.T. Vivian, who I represented, the first thing I did as a lawyer, I went to his house, and of course, my knees were shaking. And he said, "Doc, I put on my pants one leg at a time like you." I said, "Yeah, but you're you know, kind of a civil rights legend, and you put your life on the line." And he always said to me, he said, "Yes, but we knew where the lines were." And this was back in like '96. He said, "But for your generation, things are going to be stealth. It's going to be patriotism and apple pie." So with this stealth environment, with this online environment, with the mainstreaming of, we have a Project 2025 talking about deporting millions of people, this kind of anti-black, anti-DEI, we're all in this together. What can we do to promote this allyship, which you actually, more than probably a lot of people out there, walk the walk? How do we do it?
I appreciate that. I think first we have to take a step back because no matter whether, what's important to know when it comes to, is the 2023 hate crime report just came out as well. And since the first report, and there's never been a report that has never had the highest rate of hate crimes be against black people. So whether it increases or decreases, black people are always at the top. No matter what, no matter how high other groups go, it'll never reach, or at least we hope it'll never reach. This is not a competition.
No.
It has never reached the amount of hate crime that black people experience every year.
Every year since national data has been collected, African Americans nationally have been the top target for hate crime, unfortunately.
Now, you talk about the ebbs and flows, and within groups of color, our historically marginalized or oppressed brothers and sisters, including our Native American brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Muslim brothers and sisters, whatever you are, the idea is that we are all on the menu. It depends on what the dish of the day is, right? As a matter of fact, this is starting to become a buffet when it comes to hate. So the idea is that if we're all on the menu, and those of the 50s and 60s and 70s, they knew this, which is why there were so many assassinations during that time, because they began to realize that we're all on the menu, so if we band together, we can actually overcome our common oppressor. And that's why there's always these boogeymen during election season. Because if they can get us fighting against each other, then we'll be too busy fighting against each other instead of beating the people who are trying to continue to artfully and skillfully keep us marginalized and to make other people rich. So I think at first it's the realization of that, and to make sure that we also look within ourselves to not fall into it, right? Assemblymember is my black job, right? And before that, CEO was my black job, right? So the idea is, ain't no one coming for your job, right? And what they want us to fight over are the crumbs in the first place. If we fighting for that, we really in trouble. So the idea is that we have got to make sure that we understand that anytime a hate crime comes up, there is a strategy and a national and international narrative that comes with it, that people are being paid and organized to create those hate crimes to occur, right? So we have got to be artful about that. And then secondly, we have got to make sure that we don't become the devils that we're trying to replace. That in our fight against hate, we cannot adopt hateful practices ourselves. We are seeing this in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. People are losing their humanity. Everybody is losing right now, right? And so first, hold on to your own humanity. Speak up against other people who are being targeted, even if you have nothing to win or lose from it, because tomorrow you will be on the menu next.
He's so prescient. Listen to this. The 3 biggest percentage increases in major American cities: anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish, and the 4th, anti-gay for 2023. Wanted to ask you, Luis, how can we better reach immigrants, particularly recent ones, certainly to report hate crimes, but also other things? And let me just say while I'm here, if you are in California and you are the victim, or you think you're the victim of a hate crime or a non-criminal incident, call 1-833-38-NO-HATE. 83-38-NO-HATE. That's how I remember it. But and it's in many languages. But you know, we try to have this attitude. And by the way, thank you for helping with the Civil Rights Department, which wonderful folks. They staff our commission. What can we do to better reach out to communities that have obstacles? We have this saying, no closed door. What do you recommend?
Oh man, okay. Have a lot of thoughts. But I do want to say something really quickly to the last question, which was regarding allyship. And I think one of my biggest gripes is sort of like this normalized idea that allyship is like a passive act, right? Like, oh, well, you know, I support them, I gave them $25. And when in reality, in the face of such extreme hate, because that's what it is. This is extreme hate, folks. Like, what we're up against as BIPOC, you know, communities under attack, like, it is a lot, right? And we don't need people to just be like, I support you, I bought a t-shirt, you're good. No, we need people that are willing to put their bodies on the line and put their money in their mouth. Wait, what's that one thing? I always have like this major ESL moment that I don't know that like.
Put their money where their mouth is.
That. It's my ESL. You know, it's just Spanish first language. But really, you know, doing the work, right? And I think, how does that look like? It looks very different in many ways, right? On immigration, the biggest thing that we were telling folks when the first Trump presidency was coming around, take sanctuary, right? Like, open up your churches. And a lot of folks did, understanding that there is a very real likelihood that you could be criminally prosecuted for hosting people in your church. People still went and defied that. And I feel like we've lost that sense of like really putting ourselves on the line for other communities, right? And you know, like, and this is something that we all need to do for each other, right? Not one community is gonna be on the forefront by themselves. We all here have multiple identities and multiple different facets of our life that is under attack. And I think kind of like what Dr. Jackson was saying, like we need to hold each other in community and hold the line, right? Because it's kind of like the little game of rope where if it's only one person, it's going to be easier to tackle. But if it's like a whole line of us, like holding hands, is going to be a lot more difficult. So I think that's the allyship we also need to have also between races and different identities. Often that doesn't happen, but I think there's a lot of, if you're, whatever identity, you have a lot in common with anyone that's been sort of oppressed. So I just wanted to make, let's push for that, less passive allyship, more proactive allyship, right?
Mm-hmm. And what does it look like? You're about to lose control, I'm sorry.
Wouldn't be the first time.
But what does it look like? As an African American, one of the things that affirmed my existence was during the George Floyd marches up and down this downtown area, where there was more people of other races than black people. Our LGBTQ people were there. Our Latino brothers and sisters were there. Our white and Jewish brothers and sisters were there. Our Muslim brothers and sisters were there. We finally saw a multi-generational, multiracial, multi-faith coalition that pushed back aggressively. And then when we start to see the banning of books and the forced outing, right? Did you see those kids in the Inland Empire who walked out of their schools? Walked out of their schools. They weren't, that were multi-generational, multiracial, right? Multi-gender, all of that. We have seen it. We just need to continue it. And as a matter of fact, the adults actually need to follow their example. Right?
If I could just ask Candice, because what is your spin on this with regard to one thing? You're at the fulcrum of the data, and the data is so powerful. Are there certain areas where you had greater entree to make change with the, because she tracks a whole panoply of data. Just bear with me. Has there been one area where you were able to bring that data into an allied effort better? And if so, what can we learn from it?
That's an interesting question, because I think a lot of times people look at data as what's going to change everyone's mind. And that's not the case, right? I'm a firm believer, and that's why I mentioned that my outfit is a sister of a newspaper, because the storytelling and the humanization of the data is really what does that work. It's very easy to see a big number and forget that in order to make that big number, each digit is so many people, and then how many people impacted by that number. So I was talking, I think, to you earlier about like COVID-19, and in working with map makers, right? One time we were looking at a map and someone said, "Oh wow, that's so cool," but we were looking at deaths, right? And you can forget each dot is a person or is a dozen people or however many people. And for every one person who died from COVID-19, 9 people were directly impacted by that death, right? So just imagine whatever large number you're looking at and multiplying it by 9, and then thinking about what that could possibly look like and the impacts of that. And so one of the things, an important aspect of my job, because sometimes we can't access the data, or the data is there and people aren't paying attention to it, or how do we make it interesting and digestible for anyone to look at and understand. It's really important to me as a literacy teacher that, because my background is in English, if I can understand the map, then anyone can understand the map, is really how I approach it, is data advocacy. So yes, we're researching data, we're analyzing data, we're visualizing it, we're reporting on it, but then we also have to advocate for it. So
that includes like storytelling, it sounds like.
It includes storytelling, but it also includes getting in front of the right people to ask for what you need. So with George Floyd's lynching, that happened in tandem with COVID-19, right? So at the newspaper, there were 2 especially crazy times coinciding together, and we're trying to touch all of it, right, and report on everything equally. And so during COVID-19, there are a lot of myths about, infection rates in Black people, and Black people couldn't get COVID, and things of this nature. And it was really, and we knew from what we were hearing that it was actually impacting our communities more. And so at the time, most of the major outlets who were making data visualizations and dashboards about COVID were not disaggregating that data by race. And so it's not looking at how it's impacting different communities in their context with the other indicators that they're already facing and battling. So we were the first paper in the country to publish a dashboard specifically looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on Black workers in the state. And of course, what we found was Black people are more likely to work frontline jobs, so they're at higher risk for contracting COVID-19. From our work with the census, we know Black people are more likely to live in multi-generational housing, which means they're going to work, catching COVID-19, and bringing it back home to their grandmother or their great aunt. And because of what I just said about health outcomes in Riverside and San Bernardino County, on top of that, you're bringing it back home to your great aunt, and both you and her are highly likely to either become severely sick or pass away from COVID-19, right? And so we were the first to make a dashboard specifically looking at the impacts of Black people. Eventually, we had to depreciate that dashboard because once COVID didn't die down, but I'd say once the frenzy around, once it became normalized, right, and people stopped kind of being afraid of it, the state stopped publishing disaggregated data by race on Black employment. And so we had to depreciate our dashboard and do something different. That fall, we had a private audience with Attorney General Rob Bonta at the Inland Empire Community Foundation. And so while I was doing my little presentation about our maps we made and how cool they looked, I said, by the way, this one had to be depreciated because the state stopped disaggregating the data by race. And so last February, a bill was passed mandating that the state publish employment data by race, and we're the only state in the nation to do that. And so that's also an important part of the work, is it's not just about, it's data science and it's a lot of math, but it's also about humanizing it and making sure that we have access to it. And that's especially important. On the note about allyship, that word, I don't know, it's a weird word, but I think about, in the context of allyship, there's a Black saying, it may be other people saying too, but I'm Black, so I think it's mine. I'm pretty sure it's mine though. Make a way out of no way, right? Which is taking whatever you have to figure it out and make a way. And so in the case of allyship, you have privilege, right? So how can you use your privilege to make a way for other people, right? Or to, like in that case of that example, I had the privilege of having a private audience with the Attorney General. And so I made this statement. I didn't even think it was a big deal. But then someone came up to me afterwards and was like, shots fired. And I was like, was it? I was like, it was just a fact. I don't know, what did I do? But I did, you know what I mean? So I think that's really important. When we're looking at the protest, there was a video going around online. I think it was a tactic happening in multiple cities. But whenever police would approach a Black protester, white protesters would form a circle around them. And then the police would back off, right? And that was an example of white allies, and I think you called them co-conspirators. I like that word a lot better. That was before all this. But like white allies using their privilege and the knowledge that I am far less likely to be physically injured by the police to protect another person's physical well-being. And so I really think about, it's not just about being aware of your privilege, but the privilege isn't gonna go anywhere. It's here, you have it. So, okay, acknowledge it, but then instead of just feeling bad about it and crying about it, get creative and get intentional about how you can use that privilege to positively impact and change someone else's life.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to use my privilege to tell you that I'm sitting here because of a Black federal judge who took me under his wing, and I'm going to use my privilege to tell you something else. In the previous administration, there were no African American federal appellate judges appointed. That's a piece of data that everyone should be outraged about. But anyway, it's time for us to close. Assemblymember Jackson, Candice, Luis, wow. Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Testing. Oh, sorry. We're going to get started with our live Q&A. And
we're going to go to our audience live Q&A.
All right, so to our in-person audience, if you have any questions, please come to the right of the stage. But first, we'll start off with an online question. So a few people in our audience are asking about the role of schools in fighting hate. What can schools and school boards do to fight back against hate and protect and support both our teachers and students?
Who wants to take that up?
Well, I would say the first thing is that when good people don't run, the crazies take over our school boards. And that's exactly what happened. That opened up the banning of books, it opened up the forced outing. So number one, consider running. We need you to run to be able so that we can hold the line. But then number two, once you are elected, don't fall into the culture of conformity, which now you become an instrument of the institution. And then you end up actually protecting those systemic racist practices and policies. So first, make sure that your number one priority should be finding these. Usually you can see it in the data. And then make sure that you don't stop, even when you're getting on your colleagues' nerves, like I do. Make sure that you're consistently calling it out and pushing for policies to be created to unravel and change the data that you see.
I'll just add very briefly, everybody here is a taxpayer, right? Those entities, those school boards, you're funding them. That's your money at work. And whether you have kids or not, you are able, and it is a public meeting, and you can go and comment. And I think it's very important that we don't let this normalize, right? Because there's a specific reason why this hate is being targeted at schools. They're trying to educate, or rather indoctrinate, youth on the hate, right? And trying to normalize it, and we need to stray away from that. They're doing it on purpose, right? Get them young, right? That's this whole saying. And so we all need to be also allies in that sense, or co-conspirators, as I said, and show up to those school board meetings, right? There is no reason why all of us should not be showing up if there are very real threats and attacks on our youth, because they are the future, and they are the ones that are going to carry the torch. So we need, as adults, as not a youth anymore, we need to do that work and show up for them.
And at University of Maryland, they're doing some interesting research showing that if you can find commonalities between kids early that deal with all kinds of differences, it seems to have an effect, but hate crimes in schools, unfortunately, are going up.
All right, so here's our first in-person question.
Oh, you're gonna hold it? Okay. Hi, Rochelle Bernarte, also a CSUSB alum. Hello. First off, thank you guys all for your work. Also, I'm exhausted, and there are others that feel the same way, which has led to numb indifference on topics of race. How do we help people that feel these racial issues are wrong, yet are too overwhelmed to take action?
We have to understand that this is a long slog. I think Coretta Scott King said it best. Every generation has to pick up the mantle to make sure that they can protect the rights that were gained from those past generations. We have to take care of ourselves, and we have to learn how to take care of ourselves, right? Going on all those fancy trips are exhausting. You're not taking care of yourself.
I don't know about that, Corey. I don't.
Right?
I don't know. There's something
let me say.
Just say it.
We have to learn how to rest more. And we have to learn, and really what we're exhausted by is that constant anger. And unfortunately, some people turn that anger turns into hate that will ultimately be your destruction. And so the question becomes, we have to be students of the nonviolent movement, where you find joy in struggle. That you actually find that it's a privilege to be a part of that struggle of humanity that others before us have gone through. And all we have to do is do our part, even when others are not, which is also part of that anger, is that you're asking other people to join in, but they're not willing to, because they are prioritizing comfort over justice, right? But all you have to do is do your part, and continue to do your part, until it's time for someone else to take over the mantle.
I think also there's an important thing that you talked about with the nonviolence movement, and that the fact that it was always collectives working together. I'm exhausted too. I look at bad numbers all day. Newspapers very rarely report on the happy things. We're trying to actually be intentional about changing that. But I actually, I don't watch things that I should be watching. I learned about black jobs on the internet. I was like, oh, I have a black job. What is that? And then I was like, oh. But I think it's important to work in collaboration and in connection with other people, because then you're restoring each other, right? In modern times, increasingly digital age, working from home, we're isolated. And so you're reading this information by yourself. You're processing it by yourself. You're getting tired by yourself. However, when I go to a meeting with a group of black activists in Los Angeles, and I have to get up at 4 to get on the train by 7 to get there by 9, that sounds like the longest day. And I have so much energy on the way home, because it's other people who are also like-minded who are doing this with me. And it also tells me I'm not just doing it alone, and like, oh, other people did this before me too. Right? So it reminds you of the slog, and also that like other people were doing this work so that you could be at not, I don't want to say level, but you could be in this place right now doing this stage of the work. I think it's really important to surround yourself with community. Even for me being up here, right, and like seeing people I know out in the audience, I'm like, oh, I didn't know they were coming, and it's helpful, it's restorative, and so I think that's really important.
Thank you, Candice. Next question.
John Kneifel, I'm also an alumni.
I think I'm the only one.
What's going on here?
We're stacking the deck.
I'm also an MFA, like you, Candice. And one of the questions I've always had since Occupy is, where's the marketing people for these movements? Because an Occupy is a trigger word, which can be pushed back on. Black Lives Matter is a separatist word that can be pushed back on. And then defund the police was the same thing. And I always question, why is this marketing have this Achilles heel kind of thing, where there's always a way to chop it down, to where with Martin Luther King, he was always peace, and you can't really push back on peace. You can't say, I don't want peace. That would not make sense. And I just wanted to know why that's never in the conversation.
He was about peace, but he was also about his business. And I think about the word desegregation at that time was pushed back on. The word integration at that time was pushed back on, right? National Guards had to march kindergartners into school because that word was so awful. And so I do think we need some better marketing, because we have different, I lived in New York during Occupy Wall Street, and it was a mess. I'll say that, it was a mess. However, the words that we're talking about are problematic because they're words pinpointing the nexuses, the intersections of oppression, right? And so I think that's part of why they're hot button words, and also because it's the next stage in the movement. So it's always whatever we're going to push for next, no matter how we word it, is going to upset people. And honestly, if it's not, then I don't think we're pushing the right things, or we're pushing hard enough. I don't know. Corey, you have a better answer as the politician.
You did it well.
You have,
You
have elected official. I'm sorry.
I'll just echo that really quickly and just say that we need to stand by what we mean, and really be proactive about what are our values. I think we don't do that enough, and more often than not, we end up being in this reactionary back and forth, well, we don't mean that. No, we say what we mean, and I think that's something that we need to stick with. And to the prior question, what is the role? Because we're all exhausted. Everybody here has a special talent, a special skill that we're not tapping into. And I think that's something, there is a role for everyone in the movement, right? Mine is organizing, getting us all hyped up, analyzing some policy. That may not be your thing, but there's something that you do. And so there may be some marketing geniuses here that we're not tapping into. And I think that's, going back to the prior question, that's also how we avoid that burnout, is tapping into each other's specialty, skills, and community to continue the movement and continue the work.
Thank you. All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Aldone Stiles. I'm actually representing California Black Media right now. Also CSUSB alumni. Go Yodis.
Come here, go anywhere.
Right, you were actually my criminal law teacher back in the day.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Thumbs way up.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, and I know Candice mentioned how do you tell the police on the police right? What should the state, and by state I mean the government in the IE area, how should they better respond to incidents of reported hate crimes?
Say that one more time.
In what way can the state better respond to reported hate crimes, as opposed to what they're doing now, and how can we improve on that?
That's why I have AB 1799, which is again to expand the Department of Civil Rights' authority. Right now, for instance, when instances of hate arises, the Civil Rights Department cannot respond to it unless someone calls them and asks them for support. So we're changing the law to say that they can be proactive so that they can begin, and their direction is going to be to send someone into the community, help provide them with training, help them build coalitions and the infrastructure to prevent it from happening again or to respond in a better way. So the idea is that we have to make sure that we're eliminating legal barriers, but also unleashing the power of the state to actually be in the forefront of anti-hate.
And there's some federal legislation which will have both a carrot and a stick approach, because about 88% of the nation's law enforcement agencies either don't report or put a big 0 when they hand in their paperwork. Kind of like some of my students sometimes.
All right, and before we move on to the next question, this will be our last in-person question, but we will be hosting a reception after, so if you have any questions or want to talk to any of our panelists,
we're
please stay
just getting
behind.
warmed up.
All right.
Hi, Malia Williamson. So I'm also a product of California State University System, San Jose State up north, proud chemical engineer graduate. Dr. Corey Jackson, you're a friend. You know who I am. President of Riverside County now, which is a local feminist organization. So we've been trying to hold rallies and trying to do what we can to show up to the local school boards. There's a lot going on, and it's really scary what our kids are going through. The curriculum that needs to be taught is being erased. History is being erased in front of our eyes. One thing that I wanted to point out was we are recalling school board members. Dr. Komrosky was recalled. Well, he's going to be on the ballot in November. So people are asking me, I was going to send you an email, but I have the honor to talk to you in person. Can we please work on something where if a school board member is recalled, that they cannot get back on that seat the next election?
I'll be happy to author that bill in January. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
And also, I think it's important to recognize one of the most ubiquitous forms of hate is this toxic masculinity and misogyny that pervades society. And even though gender is covered in our hate crime laws, we're really not seeing it addressed as we should. And toxic masculinity and misogyny oftentimes feeds into a whole panoply of related prejudices as well, whether it's homeless, people of color. We just had up in Northern California, Asian Americans, many of them females, assaulted. We have to do better, and we have to recognize hate even when it's so visible that it's invisible. Mm-hmm. Since you're our only female on the panel, I wanted to hear what your impression was of that.
About toxic masculinity?
And misogyny.
And misogyny? It's bad.
But also no, but
it's really bad.
But we're also seeing an attack against black women today. Okay, whether it's Supreme Court justices, scholars, but so there's an intersectionality here that I think is worth noting.
Okay, this is interesting. We did, we had like an interview before this in the green room. We all did little interviews. And my question was, who was your hero? My hero was my dad. So I want to preface with that. Toxic masculinity and misogyny are definitely issues. I think when we're talking about, in relation to hate crimes and the intersectionality of ethnicity and gender, we're also talking about the intersectionality of power dynamics. And so, you know, there's a racial hierarchy to power dynamics, which is why it's important when we're talking about racism to say anti-Black, right? There's some issues with the word BIPOC because there are people who believe that BIPOC kind of erases anti-Black as a form of racism. And I mentioned anti-Black specifically because when we look at the hierarchy of race, Black people are at the bottom of that hierarchy. And then when you intersect that with gender, women are at the bottom, right? So that's I don't have a logical way to answer, like a really nice, pretty way to answer this question because I wasn't expecting it. But the intersection of those two, I think, increased I almost want to say the targetability of Black women, and that I guess you bring up a good point that hate crimes often are focused on ethnicity, but also gender is also a form of hate crimes. I think it's bad. I think it's terrible. And I also think that I'm gonna be quiet. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna stop.
It's important though, because we have to understand that we all have a little bit of all of that stuff in us. We all have some racism in us. We all have some hate in us. We all have some xenophobia in us. We all have some, for males, masculine,
But masculinity is not bad. That's why I couldn't answer the question, because I had a masculine father, but he was not toxically masculine. So that's why I don't know quite how to masculinity.
Well, that's why we put the toxic in front of it, right?
You know what I mean?
But I think the idea is this: is that we all have to first check ourselves before we start trying to check someone else. And even I'm on this stage today, tomorrow I need to still check myself to making sure that I don't do the opposite of what I was saying. Why? Because we were taught this since we were children. And we have got to unroot all this junk out of us so that we're not perpetrators of harm against fellow human beings. And so we have to spend more time looking in ourselves and then worry about other people. Because too often we're always talking about you, and then we doing all kinds of stuff to the people around us and our family members and all kinds of stuff like that too. So first, let's start being a better human beings first, and making sure that being masculine doesn't mean that you can't have emotions, that you have to be stronger than somebody else.
Exactly. And I think, too, when you're talking about you, it's also making sure that you don't look at all of the yous with that title. I think sometimes with those titles, it can strip us of discernment. Mm-hmm. And that's why, for me, it's a difficult question to ask, because I'm also, as I'm thinking about it, discerning between different examples of what I've seen. So, I agree with you with that a lot.
Absolutely. See what you started?
Well, I think this is a good time to end, because end on a high note, right? That's what I should have learned from my teaching career. But in any event, let me reiterate my deep appreciation to you, Candice, Luis, and what a wonderful representative of our government. I mean, really, not just a good representative, a good human being, and an empathetic person, something we need more in government. But I have more people to thank. First of all, Zócalo Public Square, the California Humanities, the National Endowment of the Humanities, United We Stand, the UCR Arts, and the UCR College of Humanities and Social Sciences for co-presenting this wonderful program. You'll be able to find a summary of the program on Zócalo's website in the coming days, as well as interviews with all our really excellent panelists. We should do this again. And please subscribe to Zócalo's newsletter. They have a podcast and social media for some more great conversations. They're doing more things, not just this, and you'll see if you look at their webpage. We encourage our in-person audience, and I think we're filled to the rafters here, to continue this conversation at our post-event reception over light bites and beverages. Once again, thank you so much, and please give our wonderful guests another round of applause.